The last CNC. The suit hung in the plastic wrap, swaying slightly as Mark carried it through his apartment door. $50. His last $50 until something changed. The fabric felt different somehow, cleaner, yes, but also weighted with expectation. He ran his fingertips along the lapel through the plastic, feeling the slight roughness of the wool blend that had once belonged to his father. In the kitchen, Emma was finishing her homework, pencil tapping against the chipped formica table. 12 years old and already too aware of the refrigerator's emptiness, of the way her dad checked his wallet before agreeing to anything. "Is that your interview suit?" she asked, eyes brightening with a hope that made Mark's chest ache. "Yeah, baby. Looking sharp, right?" He managed a smile that didn't quite reach the corners of his eyes. "There's something about a parent's love that defies mathematics. We divide ourselves into smaller and smaller pieces, hoping our children never notice the subtraction. We become magicians, turning empty into enough fear into reassurance." Mark hung the suit in the bathroom doorway, letting the shower steam out the remaining wrinkles. "Tomorrow at 9 a.m., Westside Financial." The kind of place with glass doors that showed fingerprints, with receptionists who could smell desperation. 6 months of rejections had taught him that much. He made Emma's lunch for tomorrow, the last of the peanut butter spread thin, an apple cut to look bigger than it was. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. The hunger was familiar now, almost a companion. Later, lying in bed, Mark stared at the ceiling, listening to the neighbors argue through the thin walls. The suit hung on the closet door, a dark silhouette in the dim light. Not just fabric and buttons, but a vessel for everything he couldn't say aloud. "Please. I'm trying. I can be what you need." We've all stood at that precipice where hope and despair share the same view. Where a single opportunity feels less like a door and more like oxygen when you're already underwater. It's in these moments we discover that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and showing up anyway. Tomorrow, one chance to convince strangers he was worth taking a chance on. One interview standing between his daughter's stability and an empty fridge. Ghost einch Ohm. The heavy oak door swung open with the weight of mahogany and money. James felt it in his shoulders, that familiar tension of being the outsider, the one who didn't belong in rooms with views like this. The carpet absorbed his footsteps, thick enough to hide secrets beneath it. He cleared his throat and she turned. 27 years evaporated like morning dew. Not Catherine Winters, CEO of Meridian Technologies, not the ice queen of Wall Street Journal profiles, just Kate. His Kate with rain-soaked hair and a duffel bag standing at the Greyhound station in 1999. Isn't it strange how the heart keeps perfect records? How a person's scent, the curve of their smile, the exact shade of their eyes, details we haven't accessed in decades, can resurface in an instant, as vivid as yesterday's breakfast. Her eyes widened just enough, a micro-expression most would miss. The slight tightening around her mouth. Recognition, followed by something else, something guarded. "Mr. Harmon." Her voice was deeper now, polished by boardrooms and authority. "Please, have a seat." James lowered himself into the chair across from her desk, catching the faint scent of her perfume. No longer the drugstore vanilla she once dabbed behind her ears, but something expensive, with notes of sandalwood. His palms dampened against his thighs. She hadn't expected him. Had deliberately not reviewed his file, he realized. The interview request had come with his resume but no photograph. A blind spot in her meticulous preparation. We build our lives in layers, like sedimentary rock. Each version of ourselves pressed down by the weight of new experiences, new identities. But beneath the suits and titles and carefully constructed personas, those earlier layers remain intact, waiting to be excavated by the right archaeologist. "It's been a while," he said, the understatement settling between them like a third presence in the room. Her fingers, tipped with clear polish now, not the chipped black she wore when they shared cigarettes behind the movie theater, tapped once on her desk calendar. 27 years, 4 months. A pause. Approximately. The city sprawled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, indifferent to the collision of past and present occurring on the 38th floor. James swallowed, tasting the ghost of goodbye on his tongue, all the words she never said before she boarded that bus and disappeared from his life. Enter Vito F. Colfar. Your resume shows a significant gap between 2008 and 2011. Catherine's voice carried the practiced neutrality of someone who had mastered the art of making questions sound like accusations. Could you explain that period? James shifted in the leather chair that creaked beneath him. The conference room felt air-conditioned, raising goosebumps along his forearms. Or maybe it was her gaze, clinical, detached, that chilled him. As she leaned forward to slide his resume across the polished table, her sleeve pulled back just enough. There it was, the small, crescent-shaped scar on her left wrist. A camping trip, July 1998. She'd reached for a pot of boiling water that was tipping over. He'd written a song about it later. Something about battle scars and beautiful warriors. We carry our histories on our skin, some visible, some hidden. The scars that others can see are rarely the ones that hurt the most. It's the invisible wounds that shape us, that make us build fortresses around the softest parts of ourselves. I was caring for my father. James answered, his voice steadier than he felt. Early onset Alzheimer's. He passed in 2011. Something flickered across her face, a momentary crack in the veneer. She'd met his father once, at a diner off Route 16. Dad had called her Keeper. When she went to the restroom. I see. She made a note with a Mont Blanc pen that looked too heavy for her slender fingers. Those same fingers had once traced constellations on his back, naming stars he'd never heard of. And the position at Hargrove Systems. You were there less than a year. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes from pretending not to know someone who once knew every inch of your soul. It's like speaking a foreign language when you both know you're fluent in the same mother tongue. An exhausting translation of what could be said into what should be said. James watched her twisting her wedding ring. A nervous habit she'd always had with jewelry. The diamond caught the fluorescent light, fracturing it into tiny rainbows on the table between them. Company downsizing. He replied, wondering if she remembered how he'd promised her a ring someday, back when promises were easy to make and impossible to keep. I was last in, first out. She nodded, her eyes dropping to his left hand, bare of any ring, before returning to the resume. The scar on her wrist disappeared beneath her sleeve again, like a memory being tucked away where it couldn't cause any more damage. THUNFNECEC. I'll just step out to grab the benefits package, the HR manager said, her heels clicking against the hardwood as she left. The door closed with a soft click that echoed in the sudden vacuum of sound. James and Catherine sat across from each other, the conference table stretching between them like an ocean. The wall clock ticked, each second a heartbeat in the artificial quiet. Outside the window, rain began to speckle the glass, distorting the city skyline into watercolor smudges. Catherine's fingers tightened around her pen until her knuckles whitened. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, stripped of its corporate polish. Why didn't you ever come looking for me? There are questions we carry for decades, questions that grow heavier with each passing year. They sit in our throats like unswallowed pills, bitter with the taste of what ifs and might have beens. And when we finally speak them aloud, we're never prepared for the answer. James felt something crack inside his chest, a dam he'd built stone by stone since that rainy morning at the bus station. He looked at her directly, at the fine lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, at the careful way she'd constructed herself into someone unbreakable. I did, he said. Her eyes widened, pupils dilating with surprise. A small vertical line appeared between her brows, the same one that used to show up when she concentrated on sketching his portrait in the dim light of his basement apartment. Your stepfather. James continued, his throat tightening around the words. He found me first. Told me you were finally free of your mother's problems, that you had a full scholarship, that I was. He swallowed hard. That I was the anchor that would drown you. Love makes martyrs of us all. We convince ourselves that suffering in silence is noble, that carrying burdens alone is strength. But secrets calcify inside us, becoming the very bones that hold us upright, until we can no longer remember who we were before we decided to protect someone by deceiving them. Catherine's hand moved to her mouth, pressing against it as if to hold back words, or perhaps a sound she wasn't ready to release. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the window like impatient fingers. He said you'd asked him to tell me to stay away, James said, the 15-year-old lie finally exposed to oxygen. I believed him because I thought you deserved better than what I could give you then. A tear slipped down her cheek, catching the light before she quickly brushed it away. The corporate mask cracked, revealing the 18-year-old girl who had waited at a different bus station, looking for someone who never came. Tichinendu Sunrisi. The HR manager returned, sliding a glossy folder across the table with a practiced smile. "Here's our standard benefits package, Mr. Harmon." Catherine's eyes never left James's face. "Thank you, Diane. Could you give us a few more minutes?" After the door closed again, Catherine reached for a tissue from a discreet box on the credenza behind her, dabbing at the corner of her eye with a quick, efficient motion. Professional even in vulnerability. "Your daughter," she said, glancing at the personal information section of his resume. "Lily. She's 17 now." James nodded, his throat tight. "She wants to study engineering." "Smart kid. Smarter than I ever was." A small genuine smile softened Catherine's face. "You raised her alone. Her mother left when she was 2. Said parenthood wasn't what she signed up for." The old pain had dulled to a familiar ache, like an old sports injury that flared in cold weather. The choices that define us rarely announce themselves as such when we make them. We simply do what needs to be done. Stay when it would be easier to leave. Rebuild when it would be simpler to abandon. Only years later do we realize those quiet decisions formed the bedrock of who we became. Catherine stood, walking to the window. Rain streaked the glass, transforming the city into impressionist brushstrokes. Her reflection overlaid the view, a woman caught between worlds. "You know," she said, her back still to him, "I've built this company on predictive algorithms. On data that tells us what people will do based on what they've done before." She turned, and something in her eyes had changed, warmer. Less guarded. But the data never accounts for growth, for the ways people evolve when tested. James felt a shift in the air between them, like atmospheric pressure dropping before a storm breaks. Narrator's reflection: sometimes life gives us second chances, not to repeat the past but to demonstrate how far we've come from it. Not to reclaim what was lost, but to discover what might still be found with the wisdom we've earned in the interim. "The position," Catherine said, returning to her seat, "requires someone with exceptional judgment. Someone who understands that integrity isn't just about following rules. It's about making difficult choices even when no one is watching." She extended her hand across the table. "I'd like to offer you the job, James." His fingers met hers, a professional handshake that couldn't help but carry echoes of other touches, other times. Her skin was cooler than he remembered, but her grip was stronger. "I accept," he said, feeling something long dormant beginning to stir in his chest, not the reckless hope of youth, but something steadier. Something that might endure.